Hi YouTube. How safe are these revolvers? Can these revolvers go off on their own? If you accidentally drop this revolver, will it fire? Hi, I want to talk about gun safety and mainly about external safety on these revolvers. If you look at this revolver, it's a 38 special plus P. It is clear. There's nothing in the cylinder. This gun has, for all intents and purposes, no external safety. Yes, it does have a safety when not in use. Inside here, if you see, there's a little area here where you insert a key. You turn the key and it locks the hammer and the trigger, and you cannot use the gun. It would essentially make this gun useless. But obviously, if you tend to carry something like this, you would not have the lock on. So when you're carrying this gun and you have deactivated the lock, what other safety are there on this gun? Well, there is none. But like in all guns, there is a safety that must be practiced, and that is your hands. And more importantly, or specifically, is your finger. Whenever you hold this gun, your finger should never be on the trigger. That is the safety of not just this gun, a revolver, but in all guns, including rifles. That is the biggest safety, and the one that needs to be practiced. Because in these modern guns, these guns do not go off by themselves. They're designed in such a way that pretty much is almost impossible for them to go off. In the early years of the manufacture of these guns, many of the guns did have a reputation of going off by themselves. If you dropped the gun and you were to strike that hammer, it would strike the firing pin that's in the cylinder and the gun would go off. So I guess, as they say, necessity being the mother of all invention, when they notice the flaw, what they used to do was then, to prevent that, was, this happens to be a 5-cylinder. They would only load 4 rounds in the cylinder, keeping one cylinder open, and then as you closed your gun, you closed it to the empty cylinder, so that there would be no accidental discharge by hitting the hammer. Well, if you had a 6-shot revolver, then that means you could only use 5, because one was always empty. And since back then they were primarily single action, which means you had to pull the trigger, the hammer back, and then squeeze, then when it was in the resting position, there was an empty cylinder, no bullet in there, and as you cocked it, it would turn to the next cylinder, which did have a round. That was practicing safety. Well, someone, I guess, began to look at the way it was built and decided to come up with a new design so that you could have all the cylinders filled with ammunition. Well, how did you prevent the external, the discharge by hitting the hammer by mistake, or dropping the gun by mistake, or bumping and hitting the hammer. How did you prevent that from going off? Well, in these modern day guns, they added what's called a transfer bar. Now quickly, let me show you a crude drawing to show you what this is. If you look here, this is the hammer that's in the resting position. Okay, now inside here, inside this cavity here, there's a firing pin. Unlike the old days, the firing pin was on the hammer itself. This piece came to a point. There was a little hole in this area back inside here that when the hammer went forward, that pin would go travel through the hole, striking the primer of the bullet, making the bullet go off. Well, they removed that firing pin. And let me show you what the new design is. This is the new design. This is your hammer. They removed the point. This area here would be this area here. Okay? This area here would be the cylinder where the bullet is. What they did was on the hammer, they removed a portion of the hammer. So there's a gap between the hammer and the back part of, or the inside part of this area here, this gap. Here's an internal, which is in here, a firing pin. This firing pin will be located directly behind your bullet where the primer is. In the resting position, which is like this, you can note that this hammer would never, ever, ever touch that firing pin. There's just a cutaway. It's empty space there. How do you get this hammer to strike this firing pin so that it can strike the primer? What the new design did was very ingenious. Here is a bar, a piece of metal, or a bar. That's called the transfer bar. That's what I was talking about. When this hammer is cocked backwards, what happened is that this transfer bar raises up and sits right in front of the firing pin. And so when you pull the trigger and the hammer is released and goes forward, this part of the hammer strikes the transfer bar, which in turn strikes the firing pin, which then strikes the primer, making the gun go bang. When you release the trigger, the transfer bar drops back down away from the firing pin. So in this design, you can see that no matter how many times you hit this hammer, you strike it. If you were to strike this or drop it onto the hammer, this hammer will never ever touch the firing pin because of this cutaway. The only way that this hammer can make this gun go boom is that this transfer bar must be in the up position, and the only way that this can go up to the up position is the hammer must be cocked back. Now let me show you this. If you look very closely at this space here, you can see right through the space. You see the pen? Look at what happens when I pull the hammer back. You see nothing, but watch what happens when I pull the trigger. The transfer bar just went up and it's in front of the firing pin. When I do this, you'll be able to see through here the firing pin protrude. Do you see it? Do you see it go in? It's out. See it going out, back in. See it going out. See it going back in. That transfer bar has just raised up and became in front of the firing pin, and the hammer now is pushing the firing pin in. Watch what happens when I release the trigger down here. Look at the firing pin. You see it went back in? It went back in because the transfer bar dropped back down. So understanding that, you see that this gun and many other guns, revolvers, are safe. There's no more accidental discharge because the hammer can never touch that firing pin. You would have to intentionally pull the trigger for the gun to go off. Now that's one design, and other guns have the same design, only it's relatively backwards. And how it is when the hammer is in the resting position, there's a transfer bar that gets in front of the hammer, keeping the hammer from ever touching the firing pin. It's kind of the opposite. And so the transfer bar will be in place, blocking the hammer from the firing pin. It can't get to the firing pin. When you cock the hammer back, the transfer bar drops, giving the hammer access to the firing pin. It's the same thing as this Taurus, only in backwards sequence. Nonetheless, it is the same principle. These guns are very safe to fire. These guns are very safe to handle. You could, if you carry, conceal carry, and as long as your finger never touches that trigger, this gun will never go off. Hopefully this explains how these guns work for those of you that are new to the gun community. I had made a video about this before, but somehow I don't know what happened, all my videos were erased. I'm trying to get in contact with YouTube, but in the meanwhile, so I decided to refresh the video in a higher quality anyways. So this is how it works. So for those of you that are planning to get a revolver or a gun, as it were, remember that even though they don't have external safeties, because some guns do and some guns don't, these guns are very safe. They take that into consideration, and so there are designs that internally make these guns safe. Don't be afraid of them. They won't go off by themselves. As long as you practice safe handling of this gun. Never, ever, ever, and I cannot stress it enough, never ever touch that trigger until you're ready to actually fire the gun. Thank you for watching. If you like it, subscribe. If you like the video, thumbs up the video. And if you have any questions or any comments, they're all welcome. Until next time.